Mechanic fixes car for free. Later finds out it belonged to his missing sister. What if the one good deed you did out of habit turned into the answer to a question that haunted your entire life? In a snow-dusted town where nothing ever changed, one mechanic thought he was just helping a stranger with car trouble. But inside the rusted shell of that car was a clue, a photograph, and a name he hadn't spoken aloud in 20 years. His sister's name, the girl who vanished without a trace. And what came next unraveled a truth more haunting and beautiful than he ever imagined. Before we begin, if stories of lost connections, quiet redemption, and the fragile power of hope speak to your heart, don't scroll away, because this story could change the way you think about the past. The snow had just started to fall again in Elmswood when Cal Maddox flipped the sign on his garage door to closed and reached for the space heater that never really did its job. The holidays were around the corner, but there wasn't a light hung on Main Street. Not yet. Town council said the budget didn't allow for cheer. Cal didn't mind. Christmas had long since stopped meaning what it used to. He moved through the garage like a man made of habit, checking oil pans, wiping down tools, setting the radio dial to static just for the background noise. Then he heard it. A rattle. A soft cough of a dying engine pulling into the lot. Not an appointment. Not anyone local. Just a car barely holding itself together and a woman behind the wheel who looked like she hadn't slept in days. Cal stepped out without thinking, just like he always did. He had no way of knowing that the car she drove, the one with duct tape on the bumper and a dent over the back right tire, used to belong to his sister. Wow. Katie Maddox, the girl who disappeared the summer of '03. Cal didn't recognize the woman, but something about the way she gripped the steering wheel, white-knuckled, rigid, made him pause. She stayed inside the car for a moment too long, like she was bracing herself for something that hadn't happened yet. When she finally stepped out, her boots crunched on the gravel, and her breath came in shallow clouds, brown hair tucked under a threadbare beanie, shoulders hunched into a second-hand coat that looked one harsh wind away from falling apart. "Sorry to drop in so late," she said. Voice rough from cold or crying, it was hard to tell. "I was headed west when the heater cut out." Then the whole thing started shaking. Cal nodded, already wiping his hands on a rag. "Pop the hood," he said, keeping it simple. She didn't offer her name, and he didn't ask. Some people came in with more story than car. This one seemed to be all silence and engine trouble. The car was a mess, no doubt about it. Another one Camry with salt rust creeping over the wheel wells and an engine that hadn't seen real maintenance in years. Still, Cal had a soft spot for lost causes. He worked in silence. Tools clicking and clinking in the quiet. She stood off to the side, arms wrapped around herself, eyes darting toward the garage like she was afraid of what might be inside. Or who? He asked the usual questions. How long it had been making that noise? Whether it had overheated before. She answered in short phrases, carefully measured, never more than she had to say. But Cal wasn't listening for words. He was listening for something else, something in the air around her that didn't feel right. When he leaned into the glove box to reset the fuse for the blower motor, that's when he saw it. A photograph, yellowed at the edges, tucked carelessly beneath a stack of registration papers and expired coupons. It was of a girl, 10, maybe 11, freckles across her nose, a crooked smile, and one arm slung around a golden retriever. Cal's hand froze. His breath caught in his throat before he even knew why. But he knew that picture. He knew the curve of that grin and the little scar above her eyebrow. It was Katie, his sister, the one who vanished without a word on a summer night 2 decades ago. His fingers trembled as he slid the photo out. "Where'd you get this car?" he asked, turning slowly. The woman tensed. "I bought it a few months ago. Private sale. Up near Grayfield." Cal tried to swallow the lump rising in his throat. "Did you know the last owner?" She shook her head, eyes narrowing. "No. He didn't talk much, just wanted it off his hands. He didn't say anything more, just nodded and kept working, heart pounding like a hammer inside his chest. When he finished the repair and the engine coughed back to life, she pulled out a thin wad of cash. How much? Cal looked at her, then the car, then back at her again. Don't worry about it, he said. She stared at him like she didn't believe it. Seriously? He nodded once. Yeah, just get somewhere safe. She hesitated, then slipped the bills back into her coat and drove off into the falling snow, taillights fading until they were nothing but two red dots swallowed by the dark. Cal stood in the cold long after the car had gone, still holding the photograph like it was the last real thing in the world. Katie's eyes smiled back at him, frozen in a moment he never thought he'd see again. And in that moment, for the first time in 20 years, he dared to hope. Cal didn't sleep that night. He tried, poured himself a cup of instant coffee, turned on the old TV, even sat in his recliner with the chain curled at his feet, but the photo wouldn't leave his hands. He turned it over and over, as if some hidden message might surface in the smudged corners. The handwriting on the back was faded but unmistakable. Katie, summer '03. His fingers brushed the ink like it might smear under his touch. He hadn't seen that picture in years. Not since the local sheriff boxed up what little they found and called it a dead end. Back then, they said kids ran away all the time. That she probably found a ride out of town, maybe to the coast. That she'd show up eventually, but she never did. And over the years, the search turned into silence, and silence turned into routine. Until now, by morning, Cal was already at the garage, the door still locked, a notebook open on the counter. He made a list: VIN check, previous registration, Grayfield, who was selling junkers up there. He circled the town name twice. Small place, about 2 hours north, mostly farms and back roads. If someone sold that Camry, there had to be a record, something he could trace. Cal wasn't a detective, but mechanics had their own kind of logic. You followed the noise, found the source. This was no different. He called in a favor to a parts supplier upstate who owed him for a rushed alternator swap last winter. You still got access to DMV logs. The guy paused, then muttered, Depends. What are we looking for? Cal read off the VIN from the photo he'd snapped under the hood. Get me what you can. Hours passed with nothing but the hum of the heater and the occasional ping of the computer. Then, just after lunch, his phone buzzed. The message was short. Last reg, owner, D. Maddox, Grayfield. No address listed. Just a P.O. box. Cal's chest went tight. D. Maddox. Their father's name, dead 10 years now. Liver failure and regret. But the car was titled under him. That didn't make sense. Not unless Cal's mind raced. Not unless someone used his name, or someone close to him had kept the car all these years. Katie. The P.O. box gave him a place to start. He closed up shop early, tossed his coat into the truck, and hit the highway. The sky was turning that soft winter gray, the kind that made the landscape look like an old photograph, washed out. Grainy, forgotten. He drove with the heater on full blast, gripping the wheel like it might fall apart in his hands. Grayfield appeared like a whisper of a town. A single gas station, a diner that looked closed even when it was open, and a strip of mailboxes near the town hall. Cal pulled over and stared at box 214. The key he didn't have, the answers he needed behind a thin sheet of brass. He walked into the tiny post office, heart pounding. Can I help you? The clerk, a woman in her 60s with dyed auburn hair and a tired smile, looked up. I'm looking for whoever holds P.O. Box 214, Cal said, trying to sound casual. Friend of mine asked me to drop something off. The woman squinted. That box hasn't been checked in a couple weeks. Belongs to a Miss K. Lane? The name hit him like a slap. Not Maddox, but close enough. Lane was their mother's maiden name. He thanked the woman and walked back to his truck, knees suddenly unsteady. Katie. She had to be alive, using a different name, keeping low. Why? What was she running from? Or who? Cal stared out at the empty street, wind tugging at the edges of his coat. The world suddenly much larger and more complicated than it had been just 24 hours ago. He thought he'd buried his sister in memory, in silence, in the ache that never healed. But now, she was closer than ever, and he had no idea what he'd find when he finally caught up to her. The name didn't leave Cal's mind the entire ride home. Katie Lane. It rolled around in his thoughts like gravel in a hubcap, rattling louder the longer he drove. Katie Lane. Of course she'd use that name. Their mother's maiden name. Simple, clean, forgettable in the right town. He could almost see her writing it down somewhere, eyes scanning over her shoulder, hands trembling just enough to smudge the ink. Whatever life she was living now, she didn't want to be found. But she'd left behind something she never meant to. That photograph wasn't a mistake. It was a breadcrumb, and Cal wasn't about to ignore it. Back at the garage, the evening dragged long. He barely touched his dinner, barely spoke to the dog, just sat with the photograph and the notebook, trying to build a story out of scraps. He mapped out every detail he had: Grayfield, the P.O. box, the woman in the Camry. That part still didn't make sense. Who was she? And how did she end up with Katie's car? He needed answers. But more than that, he needed a reason. For 20 years, the silence surrounding Katie's disappearance had been deafening. It had changed the shape of their family, carved emptiness into every holiday, every conversation that turned quiet too fast. Cal had learned to live around it. But now, the silence had a crack in it, and he was ready to break it wide open. The next morning, he made the drive to Grayfield again, this time with more purpose. He went straight to the diner. Every small town had one. And they were always good for two things: hot coffee and better gossip. Inside, the bell above the door jingled, and heads turned. He kept his shoulders loose, his voice low. The waitress, a woman in her late 40s with a name tag that read Brenda, poured him coffee without asking. "You're not from around here," she said, not unkindly. Cal nodded. "Just passing through. Looking for someone. Actually, goes by Lane." Brenda's eyes didn't flicker, but her hand paused on the coffee pot. "Can't say I know the name," she said carefully. "She's got a P.O. box here. 214. That got her. A shift in her stance. A quick glance toward the back of the diner. "Look, mister, I don't know what you're after, but if she wanted folks to find her, she wouldn't be going by that name. Whatever trouble you're bringing, best leave it where it started." Cal set his cup down. "She's my sister," he said simply. "She's been gone a long time." That softened something. Brenda sighed, wiping her hands on a rag. "She comes in sometimes, orders grilled cheese, no tomato. Always sits in the last booth by the window. Doesn't say much. Doesn't stay long. We don't ask questions." Cal felt something loosen in his chest. "When was the last time you saw her?" Brenda thought for a second. "Maybe 2 weeks ago. She looked tired, sad. Maybe like someone who keeps trying to disappear but never quite manages it." Later, Cal sat in the booth she always chose, tracing the grooves in the table with his thumb. He left a note with Brenda, folded neatly, addressed simply, Katie. Inside, it read, "I'm still here. I never stopped. Come find me, or let me find you." He left his number. It was all he could do now. He didn't know if she'd read it, didn't know if she'd show, but he'd opened the door, and maybe that was enough. The drive home was quiet. The road unspooled beneath his tires, mile after mile of frostbitten land and memories he didn't ask for. He remembered the last time he saw Katie, her backpack slung over one shoulder, that stubborn tilt to her chin, The kind of goodbye that doesn't sound like one until it's too late. She'd been barely 60. A fight with their father. A slammed door. And then nothing. No calls. No sightings. Not even a rumor. Just silence. And now, after all this time, he was chasing shadows that looked like her. Chasing cars and diner receipts. Chasing grief wrapped in hope. Back at the garage, Cal sat in the office with the door open. The cold seeping in through the cracked window. The phone sat silent. The photograph was still on the desk. He leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling, counting each breath, each heartbeat, waiting for a ring, a knock, a sign, something, anything. Because now that he knew she was out there, not knowing wasn't an option anymore. The phone rang 3 days later. Cal had almost stopped checking by then. Told himself it was just a long shot, that she probably tossed the note without reading it. But when the old landline buzzed to life and he heard the voice on the other end, everything in him went still. "I don't know if this is a good idea," the woman said. Her voice was older now, steadier. But Cal knew it in an instant. It hit him low in the chest, like a breath he hadn't taken in 20 years. "Katie," he asked, barely above a whisper. Silence hung on the line for a beat. Then, "I go by Kate now." Just Kate. It was her, alive, real, calling from somewhere nearby. Just a few miles of road and 2 decades of unanswered questions away. They agreed to meet the next morning. Neutral ground. Her terms. An old park on the edge of Grayfield. The one with the frozen duck pond and rusted swing set that looked like it hadn't held a child in years. Cal arrived early, parked his truck, and waited on a bench with a thermos of coffee growing cold in his hands. The sky was the kind of gray that seemed to stretch forever. No sun, no shadows, just the kind of morning that felt suspended between seasons. Between what had been and what might still be, she walked up slowly, her steps cautious but deliberate. She looked different, shorter hair, lines on her face that time etched quietly, but unmistakably her, the same eyes, that same flicker of fire hiding beneath a lifetime of running. She stopped a few feet away, her hands buried in the pockets of a tan coat that had seen better years. Cal stood, unsure whether to reach out or wait. "You look tired," she said, offering a small smile. "You look alive," he replied, and that broke something between them. The tension, the silence, the years, they cracked and fell apart in that moment. They walked slowly around the pond, steps crunching over the frost-bitten path. She didn't speak much at first, and neither did he. Sometimes silence was safer. But then, like a dam giving way, she began to tell her story. She had left home that summer night because she was scared. Their father had gotten mean after the factory closed, his anger spilling into fists and shouts that filled their little house. Cal remembered the shouting, but he never knew how bad it got when he wasn't home. "I couldn't breathe in that house," Kate said. "So I ran, and then I kept running." She ended up in Chicago first, sleeping in shelters, scraping by on fast food jobs and luck. A man helped her once, a kind face who offered a couch and then tried to claim more. She left before it turned worse. Eventually, she found smaller towns, places she could disappear in, change her name, keep her head down, just survive. Cal listened, his jaw clenched tight. He wanted to go back and fix it all, undo every moment she felt alone. But all he could do now was listen. "Why didn't you call?" he finally asked. "I would have come for you. I would have." She stopped walking and looked at him. "Because I didn't want to ruin what you had left. I figured you moved on. I didn't want to drag you into the mess I'd become." Cal shook his head. "You were never a mess, Katie. You were just a kid who got left behind." They sat on a bench overlooking the pond, the air sharp with cold. She told him about the car, the Camry. It had been given to her by a woman at a halfway house in Nebraska. No questions asked. She didn't know it was registered under their father's name. Just another hand-me-down in a life full of borrowed time. She'd been heading west again, chasing a job that fell through. That's when the car broke down. When she met Cal and didn't know it, or maybe she did. Maybe something in her had recognized him and she couldn't face it. "When I saw your note at the diner," she said softly, "I knew I had to stop running, at least for a minute." Cal reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the photo. The one from the glove box. He handed it to her. Her hands trembled as she took it. Her eyes welled up, but no tears fell. "I thought I lost this," she whispered. "No," Cal said. "You just left it for someone who still needed to remember." For the first time, she leaned against him. Just a little, just enough. And they sat there together. Brother and sister. Not quite whole, not quite healed, but finally found. They met a few more times after that. Nothing grand or dramatic. Just slow steps back towards something that used to be called family. Cal didn't push. He knew better than to expect too much too fast. Kate was like an animal that had lived too long in the wild. Skittish, alert, always waiting for the catch. So they stuck to coffee, short walks, quiet conversations. Each time, she shared a little more. How she had changed her name at least 4 times. How she still woke up, sometimes expecting to run. How she kept a packed bag under the bed, just in case. But there was something else. Too beneath the caution, beneath the weight she carried. Something fragile but steady. A flicker of wanting to stay. One cold morning, they sat on the tailgate of Cal's truck with a thermos between them. She was quieter than usual, eyes fixed on the horizon like it held a question she couldn't answer. "There's something I didn't tell you," she said finally, voice low. Cal didn't speak. He just waited. "I had a daughter," she said, her breath hitching. "Years ago. Gave her up. I wasn't ready. I couldn't take care of her. But I think about her every day." Cal didn't know what to say, so he didn't say anything. He just reached over and rested a hand on her shoulder. And she didn't flinch. That night, Cal sat on his porch, staring at the stars while the dog snored at his feet. The town was quiet, the way small towns get when winter starts creeping in through the windows. He thought about everything Katie had told him, about what she'd survived, about the holes life had carved into her and how she'd kept walking anyway. He thought about that little girl somewhere out there, not knowing she had a mother who still carried her in every heartbeat. And he thought about the way grief never really leaves. It just finds new rooms to live in. The next week, Cal got a letter in the mail. No return address. Just his name in blocky handwriting. Inside was a photo, Katie, younger, holding a baby girl wrapped in a yellow blanket. On the back, in shaky script, her name is Hope. Cal stared at the photo for a long time. He hadn't cried in years. Not really. But that night, he did. Not out of sadness. Out of the quiet, stunned kind of love that arrives when you realize a miracle didn't pass you by. It just took the long way home. A few days later, Kate stopped by the garage. She didn't say much, just stood at the counter while Cal finished a brake job. But there was something different in her posture, less guarded, more grounded. She handed him an envelope. "There's a file," she said, "about Hope. Where she was placed. I've been holding on to it. Thought I didn't deserve to look, but maybe you could." Cal opened it that night. Heart pounding. There were names, dates, a city a few hours south, a foster family, stable, loving. Hope had been adopted at 2. She was in school now. Straight A's. Into drawing and softball. Kate didn't ask for the file back. She just said, "I wanted someone else to know she's okay." That weekend, Cal and Kate drove south together. Just to see. No promises. No expectations. They parked across the street from a park where a group of kids were playing. One girl stood out, long brown hair, a yellow hoodie, her laugh ringing like bells across the cold air. Kate didn't get out. She just watched and cried. Cal sat beside her, hands clenched in his lap. "That's her," Kate whispered. "I know it." He nodded. "She's beautiful." They didn't stay long. Just enough. Just a glimpse. Enough to carry something forward. On the way back, Kate rested her head against the window, eyes closed. For the first time since that broken-down Camry rolled into his life, Cal felt the road under him steady, like maybe they weren't lost anymore. Maybe they were finally driving towards something whole. Not perfect, but real, and that was enough. A month passed. December rolled in with snow that clung to rooftops and softened the sharp edges of the world. At the garage, Cal hung a single string of lights along the office window, nothing fancy. Just enough to say the season hadn't been forgotten. He kept working, same as always. But something had shifted. Customers noticed. He smiled more, asked how their kids were doing. Stayed open a little later even when the cold bit harder than usual. It wasn't just the return of his sister. It was the feeling that maybe some things could be mended. Even after years of thinking otherwise, Kate started helping around the shop. Nothing official. Just sweeping up, running errands, answering the phone when his hands were too full of engine grease to grab it. She still lived in Grayfield, still kept her distance in some ways. But she came by most mornings and stayed through lunch. They fell into an easy rhythm, like the kind they might have known if life had gone differently. Cal found himself laughing again. Real laughter. Not the hollow kind he used to fake. One day, she brought in a stack of drawings, hopes, scanned and printed from a school art fair website. "I called the school," Kate said, her voice a little shaky. "Told them I was an old friend of the family. Asked if they'd put me on the mailing list." Cal didn't ask how she managed it. He just nodded and looked at the drawings. Bright colors. A house with a garden. A girl holding a dog that looked suspiciously like the mutt sleeping under his workbench. That Christmas, Cal invited her to dinner. Nothing fancy. Just meatloaf, mashed potatoes, and the kind of warmth that doesn't need tinsel to feel like something sacred. She brought an apple pie and a wrapped gift, a frame for the photograph of Hope. They didn't talk about the past. They didn't have to. The present was enough. They sat on the porch afterward, watching snow fall beneath the yellow porch light. And for a long time, neither of them said a word. Then Kate whispered, "I don't feel like I'm running anymore." Cal turned toward her. "Quiet? That's because you're home." She nodded slowly. "Yeah, I think I am." Spring came late that year. But when it did, it felt like the town exhaled. Trees bloomed slow and steady, daffodils pushing up through thawed soil along the edge of the garage lot. Cal opened the doors wide most days, letting the breeze roll through while the radio played old country songs that made the afternoons feel softer. Kate still came by every morning, now with coffee for them both and stories she'd clipped from the local paper. Things about community events, softball games, art contests. She kept tabs on Hope in quiet ways, never crossing the line, just standing close enough to know the world her daughter was growing up in. One day, a new customer rolled in. Young mom, two kids in the back seat, a minivan coughing out dark smoke. She looked flustered, overwhelmed. Cal fixed the van for free, said it was a shop tradition, which wasn't exactly true, but it felt right. When she left, Kate glanced at him with a small, knowing smile. "Wasn't that what you used to do? Fix things for free when it mattered most?" Cal shrugged, but he smiled too, because maybe that was the whole point now. Fixing what could be fixed, leaving the rest better than he found it. That summer, he framed Hope's drawing, the one with the girl and the dog, and hung it in the office. Customers asked about it, and he just said, "That one's special." And it was, because somewhere out there, a little girl was growing up with a bright heart and steady hands. Somewhere out there, a sister had found her way home. And in this small, unremarkable town, a mechanic had found something he'd lost long ago, not just family, but the kind of quiet peace that comes after the storm. Not perfect, not easy, but true. And that was enough. Sometimes, the things we think are gone forever aren't lost. They're just waiting for the right moment to come back. This story isn't just about a mechanic or a car. It's about the long road back to family, about the power of kindness that doesn't need recognition, and about second chances that show up when we finally stop running. Life rarely gives us what we expect, but every now and then, it gives us exactly what we need: a phone call, a photograph, a name written in shaky handwriting that reminds us home isn't always a place. Sometimes, it's a person who remembers who you were before the world made you forget. If this story touched your heart, if you believe in redemption, resilience, and the quiet strength it takes to start again, consider following us. Share this story with someone who might need it today. Because stories like these aren't just about the past, they're about the hope we carry into tomorrow. And you never know who might be holding on to their own version of a missing sister, a silent miracle, or a reason to believe again. So hit follow, drop a comment, and stay with us for more stories that remind us all what really matters. Love, grace, and the road back home